Welcome back to Technology. In this video, we'll be working with a mobile application and setting our image background. So the first thing we're going to do is create our project. Now that our project initialized, let's create our variable that is going to be for our image background. So we're going to call it background. Then we're going to wrap our application in our image background. Then we're going to set our source as the background variable. Next, we're going to set our styling. For the styling, what we do is set width to 100% and height to 100%. So let's wrap our entire application within our image background. As mentioned before, we're going to set our source as background. The biggest thing in mobile development with React Native and with Android Studio as well, but especially with React Native, is the styling. So if you want to be good at mobile development, make sure to pay a lot of attention in your CSS class and focus a lot of your attention on CSS and being really, really talented at CSS. And as mentioned before, we're going to set width and height to 100%. And now let's go to our mobile application. And we see that our width and height is set to 100%. The reason why we see the open up app.js is because that's in a separate component that's wrapped within the view. Once we get rid of that, we see our now blanked background. Now that we have imported our image or set a variable to import our image for const books, let's do some styling. So as you can see in our container, we had padding top set to 50 and margin set to 10 and our flex direction set to row. Now the next thing we're going to do is have a main title for the application and set that within a view tag. Just remember that with view, when it comes to view tags, it's essentially like a div tag in HTML. So we're going to set the text to assisting entrepreneurs. And now let's style that view tag, and we'll just call it text. So in our text, and we'll just essentially, just so it makes sense, call it a div tag, because essentially what these are is, well, essentially it's like a class within a div tag. So think of the text, the container, the background, think of it like a class or a class name within React. So we're going to set text. We're going to have our font size 24. We're going to text align to center. And then we're going to set the margin top to 100. And then we're going to bold it. And then finally, we're going to center the content. So the next thing that we're going to do is style our text element. So similarly to our view tag, we're going to style our text element. And we're going to set it to div. We're going to set the view tag to div and our text tag to text. So now we get to our application, and you see that assisting entrepreneurs is in the center within our background image. So next, let's import an image to our first page. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to wrap it in a view tag. Then we're going to set our image. Think of an image tag like a P tag, or like an IMG tag within HTML. So you're going to set the source. And as you can see, we already have the source above. But this is the other way that you could do it if you didn't want to call the variable itself. And we're going to take captura. And as you can see on line 4 of the code, it says images captura. That is going to change. As we do have a books.png. And there's the change right there. And within source, we're going to put captura. You can call your variable whatever you want. There's 2 ways to style the image. You can style it with 2 closed brackets, where you can have your styling essentially be within the style sheet, or you can have it be within the brackets without having to set a separate class and call the class. In this case, we're going to go with calling the class. So we're going to call the class IMG. Again, I cannot reiterate enough that one of the most important things in mobile development is understanding CSS. So we're going to set the position to absolute. Really what that will do in CSS, what that will do is it will stop the normal document flow and position it relative to its nearest ancestor that has a position other than static. Then we're going to set resize mode. Resize mode is very important within React Native because most likely your image is not a small little image that you made that is directly correlated to mobile. With mobile, there's different aspect ratio and there's different sizes. So what resize mode will do is it will take your large gargantuan size image. In this case, a lot of these images are made for thumbnails, and it will take that image and make it where it will fit the page. So like I mentioned earlier, we're going to call it with single brackets. There's another way to do it for images, which we will see later when we get to Scrollview. But in this case, we're going to do styles.img for our source image. And as you can see in our mobile application, we have our background image, we have our standard empowering entrepreneurs everywhere image, and our title. So the biggest thing to note here is what we're going to do is work with React navigation now. And the reason why we're doing that is it's similar to React Router, where if you want to have multiple pages, you will utilize React navigation, and it will utilize multiple tabs. So the first thing that we're going to install is bottom tabs. The next thing that we're going to install is React Navigation Native. And copy paste that into our terminal. Finally, which we will get to later, is we're going to install React Native YouTube iframe. And you don't normally have to do this, but this is another way to install something, is we're going to call the actual package dependency and then run npm install. Alright, the next thing that we're going to install is React Native Webview. Getting back to the code. Let's let's build a text tag. And let's style it. Let's call it text1. First, let's set the font size. Set it 24. Let's align the text to the center. And while I'm doing that, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll be making content like this every single week. I'll be making a different full-scale video. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button. And I'll do another app next week. If not, it will be something different. Maybe Python. A neural network in Python. Maybe it'll be a Golang application like last week. You just never know. Maybe it'll be a regular React application. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is set the res. I just called it res. Again, this is like a class name within a div. I just called it res because we're going to name, or our text is named resources. Align items to the center. We're going to set our position absolute. We're going to set our width and height to 400. We're going to set left to 0 and margin to 0. And we're going to set margin vertical to -100. Best practice, if you wanted, we could have just set margin bottom to 100, but we did -100 there. And looking back at our application, you see resources is not where it's supposed to be, so let's style that. And we've already styled the component. Let's just call it. So it's going to be styles.text1. And let's go back to our mobile application. And you see as it reloads, resources is where it needs to be. Alright, so next, let's build a scroll view. Scroll views are very helpful, especially in our case that you'll see at the end. We have a lot of resources. And as this app scales, or if this app was going to scale, it had even more resources. But that's really how you can have a lot of videos just back at, that you could essentially just keep on scrolling with your finger, which is a great experience for the user. There's a lot of apps that are like this. Think of TikTok, for example. Even YouTube has some elements where essentially it's just a scroll view. So let's style our scroll view. Really, we're going to call it wrapper. Really, the biggest thing is we're just going to margin top. And we're going to set that to about 280. That is subject to change depending on how it looks on the application itself. Another thing to note about a scroll view, it's going to be vertical and horizontal. If not set, it's just by default vertical. In our case, we're going to set it as vertical, or keep it as a vertical, just because I had it horizontal originally and it just didn't look good. So let's call an image so we can look at our scroll view. And these are our images. And we have books set as a variable, so let's call our image. We're going to set our source as books. And like I mentioned before, there's two different ways to style an image. You can style an image with style sheets, or in this case, we're going to style our image with double brackets. And what we're going to do is essentially have our components be within the style itself. So we're going to set our width to 390. We're going to call resize mode. You can go with center, contain, cover, repeat, or stretch. We're going to go with stretch in this case. And we're going to set our height to 200. And that's our scroll view. So now let's look at our application. And you see books is above the resources, so we scaled that down. And that is where it needs to be. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to call the YouTube player that we had already utilized last time, or I'm sorry, that we had already downloaded. In this case, it's similar to how you would call a video within HTML and CSS. So we're going to call width, height, play is equal to false, and then the video ID. I have a list of video IDs, but if you want to find your own unique video ID, the video ID is normally in the middle of the YouTube URL. And if you have any questions, you can always Google it. And now let's go back to our application. So as you can see, it's a sticky where it's right underneath each other within our scroll view. And as we add more images and videos, you'll see our scroll view won't necessarily have the sticky, but there will still be the scroll view action. The next element to go over is React navigation. So there's no React router in React Native, but there is navigation. And what that lets us do is essentially have multiple tabs, where within those tabs, we can go to multiple screens and make a full-scale application. And this application, we're just going to have 2 screens, but as your application scales, you can have as many screens as you'd like. So the first thing that we have to do is change the app name of our application and set it as const home. And then we're going to call our export app or export default app later on within the application. So we're going to set our const home like so. We don't need our return anymore, so we can get rid of that. So now let's set const tab and create bottom tab navigator. After that, we're going to wrap our app. So let's create a const called const app nav. A variable called const app nav. And here's we're going to have our different screens. So at the moment we only have one screen, so we're going to set it to tab screen name equals home, and then our component will be our const home above. And then finally we're going to wrap our app. And let's wrap our screen and tap that navigator. And then finally, we are going to wrap our app. And this is where we're going to take our navigation container and we're going to wrap that within our app nav. And then finally run export default app. And let's get to our application. As you see the little tab underneath for home. Moving on. Let's create our second page. And a little bit about this application. This application is called Assisting Entrepreneurs. So every element of the application is something that will be assisted or something that can aid in the process of an entrepreneur. So as you can see above, our first image was for books. These are great books for entrepreneurs to read. Then our next video, our first video was on EQRPs, which is what our next page is going to actually be called. And then our final page or screen is going to be an advice forum that's just for anyone that wants to add advice or just for advice in general for any entrepreneur using the application. So the next thing that we did is we created a second screen and we called it investing. As you see in our application, we have our investing tab. Now let's create another class name for our view tag. We're going to call it invest. Again, I'm calling it a class name because I'm used to traditional React. You could think of it of essentially like a class within a div tag if you come from HTML. We're going to set our flex a little bit bigger to 1.5 this time. We're going to align items to the center and then justify content to the center as well. We're going to set the flex direction to row. Padding to 0. And getting into EQRP. Let's create our view tag. And then that style for invest that we just created, let's apply that to our view tag. Now we have a view tag for our component. And I want to mention that for this application, what we're building today are the building blocks for any large-scale application that you want to build. Really, the only things that I didn't touch on in this application that are scalable is working with a database. So if this video gets a lot of love, I can just simply add to this video and add a login screen and an ability for users so that I can showcase how to build with SQLite and how to use a database. Then as far as APIs, we had an API initially in this video, but I thought that not enough people cared about the Bitcoin price and I didn't apply that page. So within our image, we're going to apply the styling. Again, this is similar to our home page. So we're going to set our source. This time we're going to make it EQRP. And we're going to call EQRP from our images folder. And if this video gets a lot of love, I will put this application on the App Store, 100% free. So all the resources and all of my previous coding videos will all be on this application under resources, as well as some other resources that I found useful on YouTube. So going back to the mobile application, notice how the picture is just way too large and you can't really decipher what is in the actual image. So let's get back to our code and fix that. So going into our CSS, and we are going to take the image that we originally made and we're just going to copy it, create a separate element called image1, and then restyle it. Changing the margin vertical. And setting the top to 0. This is what I mentioned earlier about instead of setting the margin vertical to -100, you could just set the bottom or the margin bottom to 100. What we're going to do is set the bottom to 300. We're going to create another CSS element. Then our style sheet, we're going to call it QRP. We're going to set our flex to 1. Our bottom to 315. Our left to 145. And our text align to center. And the font size to 20. We're going to bold it. And we're going to make it black. We're going to set the flex direction to row. And let's go back to the mobile application. We put the bottom down a little bit more and we raise the image. But the image at least does fit the screen, which is good. And you can see some EQRP elements. And as you can see, when we get to the modal, you can really learn about EQRPs. And now let's add a text element called investing. Because the page is not going to 100% just be about EQRPs. We will have some other elements when it comes to investing, using some tax elements. Some tax principles like deeds and liens. And other things to just assist in entrepreneurs. Things that most people don't know. We're going to lower the bottom. And overall, just do some text CSS. Some CSS to our text element. And we're just going to get rid of the bottom there. We're going to set top to 15. By the way, just in case anyone does find this confusing, the source code will be in the description so that you can walk through with the source code itself. I think that will be very, very helpful in working with this video, is having the source code handy. And put in the comments if you think that it would be easier for you in your coding journey if you had the mobile application present throughout the coding experience, or just the mobile application present, when each change happens, which is what I thought would be helpful in this scenario, just having the mobile application be present anytime there's a change. So as you can see there, we have investing present where it needs to be. So that was a CSS that we just did. So next thing that we're going to do is build our modal. So let's make a directory called source and go into our source. Then we're going to create a file called modal.js, and let's get into our file. So for modal.js, first thing that we're going to do is import our needed dependencies. So we're going to import our style sheet. Our flat list. Some of these things we might not utilize. And as you can see here, you do see an error, but that's just because there's a little bracket at the end that will be fixed right there. Importing pressable. Pressable will be utilized. And then importing modal. By the way, if you have any questions as far as modal, I use the standard documentation from React Native itself. So if you have any issues, just go over to the React Native documentation. Most of this tutorial was taken from the React Native documentation. Next is import use state. And if you're familiar with regular React and standard React hooks, because there is options to use the component model and to use hooks when it comes to React Native, we are opting to go with hooks. But if you are familiar with React, the component model, and React hooks, it is a similar process. We're going to set const live modal, set live modal like normal, and then we're just going to have it use state set to false. So moving along through our file, next thing that we're going to do is set our return statement. We're going to return our first view. Again, all of this should be standard practice by now. When working with React Native, you want to set your view. I think it's best practice to go with what I'm doing now, which is set const styles equal to stylesheet.create, and essentially just have all of your styling be like class names or be div components within the style sheet itself, just called a styles dot. I just think that's the most efficient. So we're going to set our center view. Again, we've done this before. Set margin top. And we're going to call that component within our view. Then we're going to set another CSS element for modal view. We're going to set margin to 10 and set the background color to black. I think it makes the most sense to set it to that color, just given that our background color is like a smoky white coral type color. Then we're going to set our border radius to 20 and our padding to 20. We're going to align items to the center like we've done before. We're going to set this shadow color to 000. It's like a grayish color. And we're going to set our shadow offset with our width and our height being 10. What shadow offset and shadow opacity and radius do is they create realistic shadow effects for our component. Next, we're going to set our button. Oh, and our elevation on our modal view is set to 5. Our border radius is going to be set to 5 for our button, with padding set to 10 and elevation set to 2. One thing to note is that shadow offset is essentially its own div. That's why it is in its own curly brackets, and that's because it has the components for width and height. I'm sorry, border radius was set to 20, not 2. Button close, the background color It's going to have a blue shade with that 2196F3. And then we're going to set our button open. With like a pinkish purplish shade. And you're not really going to notice it too much when we look at the mobile application. Next, we're going to set our text style to black. Again, it just makes the most sense. One thing to note, when I was making this video, I had set the CSS for the text style to black, but it ended up being black on black, so I had to change it. And when we get there, I'll show you exactly what I mean. It was for the close modal. But now it's going to be set to black with font weight set to bold and text align set to center, margin start set to 20, left set to 0. And as you can see there, we have a closed style. The reason why we had to apply that, and we applied that as white, is because we had it the same as text style, and it just didn't work with the black on black. And you'll see that as we get to the application. Again, I want to reiterate, the source code will be in the description so that you can follow along with this video. I know it is long. I will set chapters for this video so that it's very helpful for you. After setting close style, we're going to set modal style. Modal text. And we're going to do export default modal. One thing to note, and I will have to change it later, because there is a component called modal within React Native, you're going to have to change your function. It can be set to what you want it to be. It just can't be set as modal. And we'll get to that later. But first, let's start the styling. So we're going to call our first view component within center view. That will wrap our modal. We're going to set our animation type to slide. Set transparent to true. We're going to set visible to live modal. And on request close, we're going to essentially set visible to not equals live modal. We're going to do like a wait function with the alert.modal closed. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to set live modal to not equals live modal, which is that exclamation point that you see. And then we're going to close our modal. Next, create our next view component. And call that center view as well. And we're going to style it modal text. Modal view. Then within modal view, we're going to have a text and call that modal text. And for this, I created a document. This document will only be in the application. I will not put it live on anything else. It will be on EQRPs. So if you find EQRPs interesting, make sure to download this application. It will be on the App Store. And by the way, just for this video, I will make the process of putting it on the App Store also a video itself. So that if you have any questions or you have an application that you built and you don't know how to put on the App Store, I will show how to do that. So for modal text, let's style it. We're going to set the margin bottom to 30. The biggest thing there is to set the font size. Because this is a large document that has multiple paragraphs, we have to go with a smaller font size. And let's pull the next paragraph from the document. Just to add context, what this document is about is EQRPs, what you can do with EQRPs, what EQRPs are, and how they correlate to the standard IRA. I think it's very, very helpful for entrepreneurs. I use the multiplicity of sources in crafting this document. Again, we're going to style it. Same styling as before, modal text. Let's get the next paragraph. This paragraph is explaining how the traditional IRA works, what the benefits are, all that jazz. And then finally, let's pull the last paragraphs, which is the process of an EQRP, where you can find EQRPs and what you can do with EQRPs. And let's paste that in there. And that's in there like so. And now that we have all the paragraphs in there, let's now go to our pressable, or let's create a component called pressable that we imported from React Native. And we're going to style our pressable. This is a little different because what we're doing is multi-styling. So you're going to use the double brackets, but it's just two separate divs, styles.button and styles.button close. Then for the on press, again, this is another async function. We're going to set live modal. And we're going to set not live modal like we did before. And for the text, we're going to style it as close style. And we'll just call it close modal. And now we have to create another pressable so that someone can press and actually read the article and open the modal itself. And we're going to style that. This is styles.button because there isn't a close, it's just going to be an open. Again, we're going to do another async function for on press. But instead of setting it at not live modal, we're going to set live modal to true. And we're going to wrap a text. Or, I'm sorry, we're going to embed a text. And we're going to text style. And we'll call it read article. And now let's jump back to our app.js file. And let's import the modal into our EQRP page. And in our app.js file, let's create a class name for our tag called Modal. Justify content center, like always. We're going to set the margin right to 135. Set the margin start and top to 250. Again, all these things are subject to change. So when you're working with your application, or if you're following along, make sure to not only have the source code, put the source code in exactly, but then fine tune it. It might be 5 degrees to the right, 5 degrees to the left, 5 degrees margin bottom, margin top. You know, it really is subject to change when it comes to CSS. But definitely try my styling first. But just know that everything is subject to change when it comes to your styling. So we're going to wrap our modal in a text styling. The reason why we're doing that is because it is a text. Here is when we're realizing that we can't have the name be modal because modal is already imported. So we're going to have to change the name. So traversing back to modal.js. And let's change the name. I'm just going to set it to my modal. Again, you can put whatever you want. And don't forget the export default as well. Now going back to the code. See here that we have the modal exactly where it needs to be. We have it where it fits within the application. It's not too large. We have our image. We have our investing. We have our 2 tabs. This is where we are so far. All right, let's get back to the code. One big thing to note that I did not show you is that export default in that modal.js. Make sure to change that to export default my modal. If you don't do that, you will get an error. Now let's create another image called deed. I haven't really touched on tax deeds and liens. If you want to learn more, make sure to download this application as well as do your research. But we're going to take that image for deed and we're going to put it in our EQRP page. But we're going to do that later. Now let's create a third page called advice forum. It's going to be similar to our first 2 pages with our const. And then we're going to obviously wrap our image background. And one thing that I didn't do that you can do just to make it easier is a lot of things can be copy pasted, like the second modal. You can literally just take my modal, copy paste it. The only thing that's different is the modal text. Set background. We're going to set styling as styles.background like we did before. And let's get back to our application. You see here that we have our advice forum as our third tab. Now we're going to create a container called add container. This is going to be for that third page. What that third page is going to be is a forum as well as a box container. And finally, it's going to have a third modal that will have a document inside of it. Within that add container, we're going to set the flex as 1.5. One thing to note is when you're doing that, if you're going to set the box, make sure to style the box itself. If you style the view, it will run into errors, as this add container is the view component. This form.js is going to have the box that's going to rest inside of it, and this box will be CSS in this form.js page. If you do not set that box and think that you can just code the add container itself, it will run into errors. That was an issue that I had when I was building this initially. So again, like we've done before, we're going to import useState. We're going to also import our dependencies, Scrollview and style sheet, and text and view, as well as text input, because this is a forum, as well as button as well. And because it is a forum, we're going to take input as you see later. Now that we've imported our dependencies, let's create our forum. So one thing to note when it comes to the forum is if you ever worked with, like, you know, the most common example would be like a planner or to-do list. The useState functionality that we are doing with this forum is very similar to that, where you're essentially having components be built and then they're called within the view or in React within the return. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a component with an ID and a description. And that variable is going to be called advice. And similarly to the modal, we're going to have set advice within that variable. So it's going to be an array of two variables. We're going to set it useState. And then, like I mentioned earlier, within that useState will be ID and description. And these descriptions that I'm stating are really the basics, you know, when it comes to entrepreneurship. I really didn't go super in-depth, you know, build a credit score, you know, diversify your portfolio, understand different components when it comes to, real estate, you know, build credit, use other people's money. I mean, things that most people already know, but I didn't spend too much time on it. You know, I did give a little bit of knowledge, like, you know, the Chime Credit Boost, which is, you know, a card that I like to use, that I find very useful when it comes to building credit. You know, pick a scalable business, which is something that should be expanded upon, and I could do a whole entire video on picking a scalable business, just because a lot of people don't pick scalable business models. That's why I am a fan of service-based models over product-based models, just because service-based models, you know, it's easier, especially as an entrepreneur, to apply on a B2B level, you know, or even B2C with service-based. But, you know, I digress. The next element is, again, like I mentioned earlier, diversify. So I put in EQRPs, you know, ETFs, tax lien deeds. different ways that you can get real estate on a low, low price that most people don't know about, starting a side hustle. But again, the biggest functionality of this page is the forum itself, where other people can comment their advice, which we get to right now. I'm going to call it const new advice and then set new advice. And that's also going to be in a use state hook. And this is for other people's opinions, but it's the same functionality as if you were to build, a React page that, was a to-do list, and it had a text input where other people could put a to-do list. It's the same functionality here, as you'll see. Next is const add advice. So you see for the new for the new advice, it was just use state description, where you don't really need to put, which I don't think is good UX anyway, but you don't need to put the ID. The ID is just programmatic. You just put the advice, and that's set as add advice. Then we do the set advice. And we're going to do set advice, ... So the ... is a spread syntax. It's used to expand iterable objects, like arrays in this case, into an individual element. So basically what we're doing is we're using it to apply the advice, and then we're going to call the ID with advice.link +1, and then adding the new advice. Then we're going to set the new advice on the line underneath it, and then we're going to finally return it. We're going to add a view. And again, this is what I mentioned earlier about the box. So what we need to do is, within our style sheet, we're going to create a style component called box. And we're actually going to build the box so that when we call our forum in our app.js, it will have it called with all of our logic wrapped in a box, instead of taking our logic and then applying our logic in a separate box in a separate file. I think what I'm explaining is very, very fundamental to understand in React in general, especially in React Native. If you're going to build a component, you need to have the styling be in a component itself. So let's say you want to build, a container, for, let's say you're doing an e-commerce application and you want to build like a small little container for like a cart or something. You want to have that logic all be wrapped in that container in the same file. So within our box here, with our flex set to 0.9, our margin top set to 0, our background, our border padding, our background color set to white, our border width set to 3, and our border left radius, which essentially just means that our box is going to be a little curved. Our padding in our margin start, our padding set to 5 and our margin start set to 55, all within our box, within our logic, in a separate file, so that when we call our app.js, our box itself will be called instead of our logic and taking our logic and putting it into a box. I think this is extremely fundamental and paramount to understand to be successful in mobile development. But with that being said, that is our CSS with our margin horizontal set to 0, our left set to 90, our height set to 550, bottom set to 30, margin start 55, and border top radius and border top left radius both set to 10. Now we can have our box component all be within our return statement and have our logic operate all within this file, having it very, very clean. So when we call our app.js, everything is clean. So the next thing that we're going to do, again, this is standard practice in React, is we're going to call a map. We're going to map our advice because we have more than one. We're going to map through it. That's what we're doing here. We're going to take our advice variable, and within our map, we're going to showcase our view. We're going to set our key to advice.id. Then within our view, we're going to put our logic. So we're going to put our text. This text is essentially going to be how we're going to input our advice. So this is the previous advice.description. And then underneath our map, we're going to have a button. And what that button will enable us to do is add our new advice. And that will be underneath our map. So we're going to set our text input. We're going to have a placeholder. It's just going to say enter advice. The value is going to be advice.description. And then on change text, we're going to set text. We're going to do in an async await function. We're going to set text to set new advice. And within set new advice, we're going to put the text and the new advice. We're going to put the new advice and the description. And within the description, we're going to input the text that they had put. And we close that. And now we have a button. And what that button is going to say is enter your advice or add advice. And then that button is going to be called on press. And we're going to call our add advice. And that's our button. Now we just have to fix our error by closing our view tag. And that is our advice form. So traversing back to our app.js. So first we're going to add that tab screen. And we're going to set the name to advice form. Component will be also advice form. And let's get to our application. See here that we have our third tab with the image background. Now for the mod component, we're going to justify content center. We're going to set the margin right. The margin right be set to 135. Margin start set to 10. top's going to be set to 250. And now we're going to import our form. And now getting in that page with our view already there, we're going to import our form. And let's get to our application. See in our application that our box is there, but it needs to be styled. So now let's get to styling. So we're actually going to style the view and not the form component. So we're going to style the view component. And let's go to our CSS. We're going to take our res component that we have underneath here. We're going to copy it. And we're going to create a res1 CSS component. So we're going to take res. Set it to res1. And if we go to our application, we see that our box is right in the middle, exactly where it needs to be. So like I mentioned earlier, the next thing that we're going to do is create another modal. This process is the same as before. So if you have any questions about that modal process, just go to the beginning, the first modal, or just look at the source code. It's essentially the exact same process. The only difference is that this this comes from a separate document that I made on starting a business. So now we're going to import that second modal. And let's create another view tag. Set the styling to styles.mod. And within there, we are going to import our document. And make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you found this video helpful at all, definitely make sure to hit that subscribe button, as I make videos every single week. And let's close that other view tag. Make sure that everything's succinct. So as you can see here, we have two separate components taken outside of app.js. Both are wrapped in the view tag. So you can see there. So what we did was we took form and taking a look at our doc.js file. Again, it is exactly the same logic, same components, same styling. The only difference is the name of the file and the content that is within the modal text. Everything else is exactly the same as we take a look at that doc.js file. Going back to our app.js. So you see our logic. We have our form wrapped in a view component. and our doc wrapped in a view component. The only difference is that the doc is styled in mod, and the forum has its own styling with the box. That is why it is in a separate view component. Just wanted to make note of that. And I got rid of the other view component for doc. So now doc is its own component as well, where it's not wrapped in anything. And let's get to the application. You can see here we have tips for starting your business. That's the name of the tag. We have add advice, where you can add advice all in a white box right in the middle of the screen. I just put anything. I put value health. And let's get back to the code. So the last thing that I did is I took all of those resources and I added it to the application. So the last time we looked at the application, there was just 2 resources. Now, as you can see, there's a plethora of resources, both videos and images. And as you can see at the end, as we look at the entire application, you'll see that resources is a lot more robust. It's all wrapped in a scroll view. As now we're just calling more resources. We're calling another resource called tools. And that's going to be in the images folder. Now we're creating a variable called AI. That's going to be another image that's going to be within the resources folder. Or I'm sorry, within the resources scroll view. What that has is, again, I find it very helpful. It has a plethora of AI tools that entrepreneurs can use for everything from marketing to making content to copywriting to programming, SEO, you name it. Now we have the tax image that you just saw that has some tax secrets and things that I found online. That will also be in the resources. Some tax tips. And those are our resources all within a scroll view, as you can see. And then finally, we're just inputting the image for tax that we just had. That's going to be in our double box, double brackets. It's all just the standard. The only difference is the video ID for the YouTube player videos. And here's the application. So those are all the resources, as you see. Some videos I pulled online, mainly my videos, and I made all those images on Canva. Let's go to the investing page. You see the 2 images back to back and the read article. Then you see there's the article with the closed modal. And then finally we have the advice forum with the other modal. You can add advice within our advice container. And that is assisting entrepreneurs. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're just new to programming, if you found this interesting and helpful, make sure to subscribe for more.